Racism had, in my mind, crossed a line. Every form of racism, critical race theory, intersectionality, systemic racism, white privilege, the oppressed and the oppressors, other issues coming out of the feminist agenda and homosexual agenda, had crossed a line from the world where bitterness and rancor and vengeance and hatred flourish into the kingdom. And Christian leaders had begun to pick up the worldly philosophy and carry it into the church and into Christian universities and seminaries, into denominations. I said at the time that this was the most devastating thing I'd ever seen in my life in terms of tearing a nation apart, and it would be as well the most devastating thing to tear the church to shreds if it ever crossed that line into the kingdom of light. Sadly, that happened. And that has done no small amount of damage to leaders, churches, relationships, schools, denominations, and the damage is far from over. It is now aided and abetted by the entire power structure of the United States of America. And unfortunately, unwitting, undiscerning evangelicals got sucked in to the philosophies behind all of this racism, and they've taken up that cause and has created chaos with regard to the clarity of the gospel message, because they keep talking about it as if it was part of the gospel, which it is clearly not. Neither is it part of the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God. It is just the latest version of human philosophy coming to fruition. Started about 300 years ago with the Enlightenment. Some philosophers, perhaps the most well-known, Rousseau, who had a very simple agenda: eliminate God, Christianity. Demonstrate that people are good and it's society that makes them bad. Overturn the biblical doctrine of human depravity. He was such a brilliant writer that he had an amazing impact. He was followed by people like Marx, who turned it toward economics, Freud, who turned it toward sex, and it was carried all the way down to our day today. And unfortunately, the churches lack discernment to understand when they've picked up the devil's causes. Jesus said this, as you will remember, in John 18, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be delivered over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this world." There's no connection between the kingdom of God and the world. We heard the echo, still hearing in our ears, of the fact that there is a distinction between the flesh and the spirit, as we saw in Romans chapter 8. Those in the flesh cannot please God. The flesh, the world, the kingdom of darkness, one and the same. Then Jesus said, as we have noted in Luke 17, "The kingdom of God is in your midst." The kingdom is here because the King is here, as we've been seeing. He's here alive in his church. So his kingdom has nothing to do with this world. His kingdom is here, separate from the world. How in the world, in one moment, can you be a spokesman for God and then a voice for Satan? When you cross the line from God's interest to man's, I mean, it couldn't be more clear. You're in partnership with the devil because you've picked up man's cause. You're in the way of God's purposes. You're not setting your mind on God's interests. Same term that you hear in Colossians 3, set your mind on things above and not on things on the earth. Christians have been trying to use the world, the darkness, the flesh, the spiritually dead, to somehow help Jesus build his kingdom. And essentially, they have struck deals with the devil. Every effort to advance the kingdom by means of a worldly scheme is an attempt to do God's work the devil's way.